If this is your first time attending, the way that this flows, it'll be about 40 to 45 minutes. So we'll always start with me asking Adunola some questions about her journey, how she got to where she was, some questions about the job search strategy. And then we'll pause for you all to drop your questions in the chat. If you want to come off mute at that time, we'll let you come off mute, ask your question live, or if you just want to drop it in the chat or in the Q&A, either way works for us. So just a quick introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Basala, and I'm the founder of AfroKlash. This conversation is part of our Elevation series, where each month we have someone from a different industry sharing their expertise in a different area, whether it's your life, career, content, real estate, which is what we had last month. So all of the replays, as always, will be available after the live conversation on YouTube or Spotify. So I'm very, very, very grateful for Adunola, because I know how busy you are. So thank you so much for hopping on and joining us for this month's conversation. So wanted to just kick off with you doing a quick introduction, who you are for anyone that doesn't know you, what you do, how amazing you are, how you got into your career. So just a little bit about yourself.
Yes, so I am Adunola Adeshola. I am a career strategist and coach to high achievers. I typically work with mid to senior level corporate professionals, and I teach them how to land new jobs they love at companies they love without starting over, settling for less, or applying to jobs 24/7. And so I've been doing this for the last 7+ years. It's going to be 8 years in August, which is crazy. I started this path because I was that frustrated professional who did all the things, followed all the rules, got the good job on paper, and thought that I had my life figured out until I realized that I was unhappy, stuck, stagnant, lost in a career that I once loved and not really sure what to do next. And so that kind of put me on a journey of figuring out what it looks like to be able to step into a career that is in alignment with you. And it's a longer story, but I think by being able to put myself on the path of getting a career that I love, landing a new job after being in a toxic work environment, and having other people, peers, and people in my community see me do that too, it was a kind of domino effect where they were like, I am feeling the same way. I need help. And from there, they were able to use the same strategy that I use for myself to land even better jobs and at better companies. And so it kind of just became a snowball effect of, what it's become today. And so now I have this coaching program. I teach my clients how to be able to make that transition in their careers without the stress and the overwhelm. But it definitely started from my own frustrating place in my career.
That's and I love that, right? Because sometimes you come across coaches who may not have had the direct personal experience that they're coaching on. So I think it's so good that you have that experience. And I know for me personally, I'm sure people in the room right now, especially growing up African, right? You have that background of you have to be a doctor, you have to be a lawyer, an engineer, but the world that we live in right now, there's so many different paths that it almost gets overwhelming, because it's like, should I stick to what my parents were saying, or this person is doing, or this sure path that I know is going to take me to point Z? Or should I try this thing that I'm not too sure how I'm going to do? So I feel like it's gotten harder than our parents' generation, just trying to even figure out what you want to do, how to start. So I wanted to start off our conversation with that. So say I'm coming to you as a new client and I'm looking for a new job. I don't have a role. I'm just lost. I don't know where to begin. I'm not hearing back. What is your first point of advice? Like, how do I even get started?
Well, definitely want to touch on what you said about being African American, first generation Nigerian.
Yes.
Definitely me. When I was even trying to like branch into my career, I knew I wanted to be in PR, which is public relations. And I remember at that time, it was like, what are you doing? What does PR even stand for? Why are
Exactly.
you a nurse? So why don't you want to be a doctor?
Yes.
What are you doing with your life? This is not what we have in store for you. And so that in itself is rocky. And it has been interesting and great to see that that has changed, especially as an
Mhm.
immigrant. Because I think as Nigerians and Africans, we can definitely relate to that. And I think it also is like an immigrant experience.
100%. Yeah.
We don't want you to be poor. I think that is the I think that is the consensus.
Yeah.
And so it was even tough for me to even decide that I wanted to do
Mhm.
something that was so different than what my friends was doing, what my
Yes.
cousins were doing. And so I think that if you are in that space now where you're like, I know that this is something that's a path that I want, but it doesn't look familiar to me. I just encourage you to just follow your gut and to trust yourself on that journey, because it's a desire that you have for a reason. And
Yeah.
to your question, if you are in a place where you are lost, you're wanting a new job and you're applying and you're putting yourself out there and it's not going the way that you want. Let's say we were to take that journey of working together. The first step would be really assessing how clear on you on what you want. Because I do think that a lot of times we have been taught to, as soon as you're ready for a new job, the first step is apply. Like, get your resume together and start applying. Put yourself out there. And that is not my advice. Like, I don't believe that the first step should be apply, apply, apply. Because before you decide, before you put your, I like to think of it as like you're ready to get on a flight and you're just like, let me just hop on a plane. And you know, you're packing your bags, you're on a plane, and you never even check to figure out where you're going. And what happens is, if we even use that analogy, like you packed your bags, but you probably didn't pack the right clothes. You probably don't really want to be in that place. You probably wanted somewhere that was like a hot tropical weather, but now you were in Denver. Like, and that's the same thing that we do with our job search. When you start applying and putting your resume together, it's literally like packing and getting on any kind of plane. And so we want to make sure that you know exactly where you're going first. And I think that's super important, because when you are looking for a new job, we tend to give away our power when we're just hoping for the best and settling for less, right? And one of the ways that you can take your power into your career, or take power in your career, is deciding what you want, figuring out where you want to go. What does that look like? What roles are right for you? What roles align with your experience and your interests? What roles will really allow you to be a top candidate for those opportunities that are right in alignment with what you desire? Because then you can pack accordingly, right? Then you can start putting your resume together and telling a story that really aligns with where you want to go rather than where you've been, right? And I think when you put your resume together right away and start applying, you end up having a resume that's focused on where you've been and doesn't really align with where you want to go. And so you end up putting yourself out there, knowing in your mind that you're capable of where you want to go, but people don't always understand that, because you're only telling them where you've been and not how where you want to go relates to what you've done already.
I love that. I feel like this is where I always say you need some snaps in the room. That is such a perfect analogy. I love that. And it's so simple to understand. Like, you have to know your destination and you have to plan towards that. Because I think that's the normal path is, once you're looking for a job, you do the resume. Yeah, I got some snaps. You do your resume, you just get on LinkedIn or Indeed or wherever, you just hit apply and submit and apply and submit. You apply and submit. You're not really, especially there's so much fatigue, I think, that comes with the job search, that you almost don't want to spend the time to really sit with yourself and say, what do I really want to do? What am I really looking for? So I think that's really good. And even I had a career coach a couple of years ago. And the first thing that she does is mindset. Like, that is the most important thing. To your point, you have to know who you are, what you want to do before you just start. Because then you just go and you can't tell your story, like you were saying. You can't really speak to what you're trying to do. So I love that. That's such a beautiful analogy around packing and planning a trip. And I love it. I think that's something that everyone can easily remember when they're looking ahead. So one of the things you mentioned was a resume, and you hear there's so many opinions. It has to be one page. You have to have color, don't have color, have fonts, put your picture, put location, don't put location. So just in your experience, do you have any best practices, advice on what a resume should look like, or like one that typically works over another? Any format that you would recommend?
It's so funny. I feel like when we look at like the advice that we see online about resumes, there's so much advice about like what the font should be and what words you should put and how many pages it should look like and all of these things. And I think that advice is catchy. I
Yeah.
think it's catchy because we've been taught that the most important thing you need to do to get a job is focus on your resume. But again, you'll learn in this conversation that I'm all about doing things uncommon. And the font, all of that is like, I tell my clients, it's like focusing on the trees and not focusing on the leaves instead of where the tree actually is, right? Like focusing on how many lines are on the leaf instead of what does the tree even look like, right? And so I think that yes, you want to have a resume that's clean, that's easy to read and skim. You don't want the font to be too small. You know, and I even tell my clients, because I have clients who have over 15 years of experience. I've worked with clients who've been in their careers for 30 years. So when it comes to when you're a very seasoned person in your career, it could be very challenging to try to make all of that fit on one resume, one page. But I always say, like, make it, if it's going to be 2 pages, make it 2 pages worth reading. That is the advice for your resume in general. Make it worth reading. Make it easy to read, but worth the read. And so what that means is that you need to be thinking about, what are you saying? Number one, you know, because when we get to that advice of like, you have to have the keywords and you have to have the stats and you have to have the metrics and you have to, you know, say things like oversaw and facilitated. And when we get into that, that's cute. Always lead to job offers or even interviews. And the reason for that is because a lot of times when you get that advice without context, you can use it and it still won't work for you. And so the context for that is like, you should have great results. You should have great numbers and all of these things. But if those numbers do not relate to the job that you want next, you are just going to look very amazing.
Yeah.
And not get interviews. They're gonna be like, wow, this person is great. But I don't really understand why we need them.
Yeah.
And that advice of like making it pretty, making it cute, saying those power words is like the surface level advice. And the deeper advice is, what stories, track record, accomplishments, and results do you need to show to give people the understanding that you can do what they're asking you to do?
Yeah.
If you can answer that question, you got it.
You got it.
And I think that a lot of times, you know, because I work with high achievers, and so the problem isn't that they don't have experience. You probably have lots of experience doing a lot of things. And so what happens is, when we do focus on that advice of like having the right pretty resume, you end up having a lot of things on your resume that you're proud of, right? You're proud of the fact that you know, worked on that team. You're proud of the fact that you had that campaign. You're proud of the fact that you worked with that client. And you might even make that bullet great. It might be a great font. It might be a great size. It might have all those powerful words. But again, if you're not speaking to their specific needs, then you'll end up with a resume that's pretty and that makes you proud, but it doesn't land you interviews. And so I think that that should be the main focus of just focusing on, what do they really need to know? And then let everything else be the sprinkles that make come together.
I love that. I love that. And I think tying to that, one of my questions was going to be, what do you feel like is the biggest mistake people make in their job search? And I think you've kind of answered it, right? Is applying for the job, or who you've been, or just presenting who you've been and showing your numbers, but not really looking ahead to applying for the job that you're looking to be in the future, becoming the person that you want to be in the future. But are there any other common mistakes that you want to talk on that you feel like people make often, that they're doing wrong in their job search strategy?
Yeah, so even piggybacking on what I just said, I'm laughing at myself saying piggybacking like but even topping up what you said, I think like even an example of that could be like, you know, for example, there's one I've worked with many clients, but I'm thinking about like one particular situation where she was like, she wanted to be a manager. She was ready for the management role. She had been in her career for about 6 years and was ready to land a manager role. But she was like, I know I can do it, but I'm not getting interviews for these positions. Or even when I do get the interviews, they're not hiring me for these positions. And so a perfect example of how that plays out, that's a perfect example of how that plays out, because when we really looked at her resume and the way she was talking about herself, she was still talking about all the tasks that she's done, right? Like she was like, talking about all the things that she's done, the things she's implemented, the results that she's brought for the projects, the initiatives. She was portraying herself as an excellent contributor. And she wasn't portraying herself as a manager or a leader. And so we had to really go back and look at the things that she was saying. And so one of her challenges was like, instead of just focusing on the outcome, how you contributed in that, or showcase the leadership skills while doing that work, right? And so what she needed to do was to really look back at her experience and understand what are the ways that without the title or not, she has shown up as a leader. And how can she start to tell that story instead? And so even when she did that in her resume, when she did it in her interviews, she was able to then start getting more interviews, number one, and was able to get a role that was a manager position. And so I think I just wanted to give a little picture for that, because I know we can talk about like talking about where you've been rather than where you
Mhm.
go. And sometimes we can't really see that without a practical
Exactly.
example.
No, that's beautiful.
But I think some other ways of, job search mistakes, especially for high achievers, is where you downplay your skills,
Mm,
right? And so you're like, I know I can do it. I read the job description. This is a great role for me. But then you start thinking, but wait,
mm,
I didn't do that so many times. Or I did that with my team. Like it wasn't really me by myself. Or you might say, I did that, but it wasn't under my job description. Like, but I
yeah.
did it, but I just helped.
Especially women, I think we do
Yes.
that. Yeah.
Yes. So we find ways to like downplay ourselves, or even when you get in an interview, you might say stuff like we, my team and I did these things.
Mm,
Great to show that you're a team player, but I always say like you and your team are not interviewing for the job. So you need to show them how you could get on their team and do the same thing that you're telling them that you've done in the past. And so
yeah.
I think that downplaying our skills, disqualifying yourself before you even give yourself a chance,
Mm,
it's also one of those things. Like I bet so many people can relate to, finding the job description and you're like, oh my gosh, I love this job. I can do this job. But then you're like, wait. And you start
mm,
looking for that one bullet
yes.
that's like, and no, you know what? They're asking for, 6 years of experience. I only have
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
I must not be qualified. And
Yeah.
so looking for ways to disqualify yourself. And then even when you do put yourself in the room, downplaying your skills, I think is one of the things that does people a disservice, because especially when you do get those interviews, because you already are getting that interview for a reason. There's something about what you're communicating to them that makes them feel like you could possibly do the job. So when you go into that interview and you belittle yourself, you downplay yourself, you discredit yourself, you kind of take away all of those marks that were probably stacked in your favor and
Hmm.
cause to question whether or not you can do that job. So I would
Yeah.
say that's some of the things.
Yeah, I love that. And I think a common thread I hear you saying, and something that I've experienced even directly is storytelling. Like you really have to know your story that when you get into those interviews, because I was there, like there was a period for 3 years, I was applying and applying and applying. I would get into the interview, they would say I'm perfect, and I'll get the email. No, I'm sorry, unfortunately for 3 years. And so I spoke to someone and she said, how are you telling your story? Like when you're getting into those interviews, exactly like you said, are you just saying, oh yeah, I did this and I did that? But you almost have to like not sell yourself. You are selling yourself, but the person has to be able to visualize you in the role. Like they have to be able to see you sitting in that seat, owning those things. They don't want to see you owning what you're doing right now or owning what you've done in the past. But the role that you're applying for, look it up, do your research. How can you sell yourself sitting in that seat? How can you tell the story of, like you said, like, I have done exactly this in this way. So I think to your point, that's something that I found has gotten me yeses more than anything is putting yourself visual, giving the person that visual of I'm already this person. It's I can do this in my sleep almost kind of thing versus just I think so I can work on it or because I feel like that really makes a difference, even your tone, if you're slouching, if you're sitting up, like all of that I feel like really matters in the job search process. I think that's something that I had to learn over time where I was not very good at, but over time I've had to really learn that all of those things, small things, really do play a part in that interview process as well.
And I just wanted to add, because I know that for a lot of people, selling yourself, I know for me, just hearing it
Yeah,
can
I
be
know.
like so weird. Like, how
I
do
know.
I sell myself?
Yeah.
And so I just want to encourage someone, if you are in a place where you're like, I don't know how to do that, or I struggle with that, I recommend seeing it as I always say, like, you can land the job and show up confidently without that idea of it. But you're right. Like, it
Mhm.
boils down to visualizing yourself in the role. And it boils
Yeah.
down, you said earlier, of like your mindset of like
Mhm.
first knowing your value and knowing what you have to contribute.
Yeah.
If you struggle with what she's sharing about selling yourself, I think thinking about it in terms of like, how can I be informative?
Mhm.
A lot of times the people who struggle with selling themselves are usually
Yeah.
experts. They
Yeah.
don't talking about themselves.
Yeah.
Even if you're in your friend group, like you rather everyone else talk about themselves besides
Yeah.
you, right? And so
Yeah.
I think that you should think of it as like, how can I just be helpful? How can I
Mhm.
help them make the most informed decision about whether or not they should hire me? And how
Mhm.
can I do it from a place of showing them that I can solve their challenges? And so just wanted to add that because I know that some people do cringe at that
I
thought,
know, I know.
but it is something that if you have that reframe about it, it can
Yeah,
shift how you show up from an authentic place.
I love that. That's good. Okay, I'm gonna do two more questions for Adunola. If you, I think I already see some questions in the Q&A. So if you already have questions, put it in the chat, in the Q&A or in the chat. Or if you have a question you want to ask verbally, just raise your hand and we'll take you off mute. Okay, so my first, second to the last question is, there's so many job sites, right? There's LinkedIn, there's Indeed, there's all these job boards. Do you have a recommendation on this is where, regardless of your industry, this is where people typically find the best opportunities, this is the best place to network? Any advice or strategies around that?
I think there's a lot of job boards out there, some known and some not as well known. But I do think the most reputable is LinkedIn. I think that's because most employers have been taught to find the
Mm-hmm.
best on LinkedIn. I mean, it's a stat that when they are reaching out organically to candidates they think could be a great fit, that they find the best talent on LinkedIn. So you want to be where they're looking already, which is LinkedIn. And then also if you're applying, I think that there's a lot of scammers out here. And so even if you do use one of those sites, it is always nice to kind of just double check that they're also posting on the most robust job board platform, which is LinkedIn, just to make sure that it is something that is reputable, especially for those like companies that you might not be as familiar with. But my
Yeah.
short answer is
I
LinkedIn.
love that. And to the point, the same thing around the resume. There's so many advice about LinkedIn. Your profile, your bio needs to say this, your header needs to say this. Do you have any recommendations on your LinkedIn should have X, Y, and Z for those recruiters to find you without you even having to go look for them?
Yes. So inside my coaching program, I actually have an entire module on how to make over your LinkedIn, what it looks like. We do have headline formulas, we have summary formulas, what to say. But I would say ultimately, the idea is that you want to tell them what you want and
Mhm.
what makes you qualified for that. And so having a header that doesn't just focus on, I think people take up too much space when they use their company's name in their header instead of actually just talking about themselves. So
Yeah.
focus on like what, unless your company is like a well-known company that aligns with the next company you want to work with, then sure, it's another way to pump yourself up. But
Mhm.
focus on using that header specifically as a place to show them that you are the type of candidate that is looking for that kind of role and that's ready for that kind of role. And again,
Perfect.
that is a whole, if you're like, I don't know how to start, I do talk
Yes.
about that a little bit more so that you don't have to focus on figuring out by yourself.
Perfect. And then really quickly, I wanted to pivot to people because we've been talking about people that are looking for a job or in the job market. So just pivoting a bit to people that are currently in a job and they're just, like you were saying, kind of your example of why you started this. I'm just unhappy. I don't like my job, don't like my manager. I just don't feel fulfilled, but I just don't know what to do next. Like, what is your advice, or how did you even get out of the headspace to figure out how you wanted to pivot?
Yes. I mean, it took me a month to even
Mhm.
just decide that like this was not for me. I think especially when you're in a job that looks good on paper or
Yeah.
when you are like the goals in your friend group or
Yes.
even everyone else in your life is like doing well in their careers and you're the one that's not, it can feel really disorienting to feel like why, like you start feeling like why am I unhappy? Like what am I doing wrong? Like is it me? And even especially when you have a job that pays you well, that has great perks, that has all the stuff around it, you can start to tell yourself that maybe I can do better than this, right? Like maybe I'm not capable of getting a better job. Maybe this is the best that I can do. One of the things that I struggled with was feeling like I should just be grateful.
Yeah.
Like you
Yes.
should just be grateful. And so I would let that feeling of gratitude keep you.
Mm.
And the truth is, gratitude is not supposed to keep you stuck. It's supposed to remind you of what you can do. It's
Mhm.
supposed to remind you of how far you've gone and give you that push to know that you can go further. And I think when you are unhappy in your career, the first step is really dealing with your mindset, because you can try to put yourself out there. But again, if you're like doing all the other stuff, like apply, they're gonna be like, nobody even wants to hire me. I'm just gonna stay where I'm at. And we don't want that. And so I think that tackling your mindset of like, you can have better, you are great at what you do. This is possible for you. This was what you wanted then, but doesn't have to be what you want now. Like, being in that space of understanding that you are capable of more, I think is a good starting point to be able to get the more. Because if you don't really believe that for yourself, then you'll either stay stuck where you're at, think it's going to magically change itself, or try to get that job. But because you mentally don't think that you're good enough, you'll sabotage it anyways, or you'll paralyze yourself. And so really focusing on your mindset, and believing that that is possible for you, I think is a really great starting point.
Awesome. I love that. Okay. I have a few more questions, but I want to make sure we get people's questions answered. So again, if you have a question, you can drop it in the chat or the Q&A or raise your hand. So Hannah had dropped a couple of questions in the Q&A. She said, for first question, I'm an African and I want to change those old things I think I'm believing. Hope to learn more during the session. I live in Tunisia, North Africa. Awesome. Great to see you. Curious to learn how to flip this and make it work. Okay. I want to apply for jobs abroad. How to know where to find that dream position? Would you still recommend LinkedIn? And she's in Tunisia, North Africa.
Or how to find a job. So I would say, again, a lot of times we want to even think bigger than just like the tactical stuff. You know, like if you're wanting to get a job outside of, if you're not in America and you want to get a job abroad, or move to America or move somewhere else, I would say number one, focus on companies, get clear on what companies are out there that you want to be at, right? So it isn't really just about like what job board to use, but really, where do you want to work? What companies are available to you? What opportunities are in alignment with the experience you have now that is transferable to other organizations elsewhere? I also would think about what global companies are out there that maybe other people have, you know, either they welcome people of different ethnicities, so you don't even have to worry about like feeling othered. Like that's something that you should think about as well. Like, where do I see myself? I think even when I thought about when I was trying to get my first PR job, like my first thought wasn't what job board, it was more so where do I want to work, you know? And I remember I Googled like top 50 PR companies in the nation. And I was like, I didn't have no connections, but I'm like, I want to get a job at one of the top best places to work in PR. And so I started Googling these companies and saying, okay, which one do I like? Oh, I don't like that one. Then I'm like, which one do I like? Oh, I like this one. And I narrowed that down from like 50 companies to 10 that I really enjoyed, that really align with my values, that from there I had a focus. Like now I can ask myself, are they hiring? What roles are available for me? How do I make sure that I get one of those roles? And that's how I got a role at a global PR firm working with the global chairman's office without zero connections. And so I just recommend starting from where do you want to see yourself working, and then reversing that process, and then finally being able to say, okay, where are they hiring? What does it look like for me to apply for that position?
Perfect. I love that. And another question we have is how to write a resume when I switch career paths. So I guess probably going from one industry to another. I mean, when I have a career shift after 17 years in the previous position, how do I nail that new job or career?
So making a career switch is possible. And I know it can feel really intimidating when you've been in your career for, like this person said, 17 years. But I would think about what kind of switch do you want to make? So there are a couple of different switches or pivots that you can make in your career. You can pivot to a new industry entirely. So that would look like pivoting from like accounting to HR compliance or something like that. Or you could pivot from a new, like do the same work, but in a new industry. So that could look like you're in HR for legal firms, but you want to pivot to HR for health tech firms, right? So that's one way to pivot. And then, you know, there are other ways to go about that, but I think depending on what pivot you want to make, that's how you want to switch your story. So for example, if you're wanting to pivot from doing the same work, but in a different industry, that would mean that you want to make sure that your resume talks less about who you did the work for and more about the work you did and the impact it had. So rather than focusing on all the clients or the company that you work for, really focus on your contributions, how what you did made a difference and how you can do it again for the next company based on what they're looking for. But if you're wanting to make a pivot from like, let's say accounting to like HR or something like that, then you want to look at what experience do you have in accounting in that time that you spent there that has qualified you for that HR role. So instead of talking about all of the blatant accounting things you've done, you might want to consider how that translates to the actual next step that you want to make, and take out the stuff that you're used to talking about because it no longer aligns with that. So again, it's all about changing kind of like the wrappings. Like you can't really change your experience, but you can elevate the way you talk about it so that the people who need to see it, understand it, and want to leverage that for what they want to do in that next opportunity or the next role.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I think that's a great answer. And something I wanted to follow up on with that is, and I'm sure you have people, and I know people in my personal life where, say to your point, I have been in HR for 20 years. I am done with HR. I don't even want to smell HR. And I am now trying to pivot. I want to do something more creative, or I want to do something finance related, because I found that in my personal life, that is my true passion. Or on the flip side, I've been in HR for so long and I just don't know what I want to do next. I just know I'm tired of it and I want to pivot. What tactical steps or advice would you give someone of just how to figure out what to do next? Like, I just want to know, what should I try next? Should I do something should I make my hobby my job? Like, what advice do you give someone that's just lost? Like, I just don't, I know I'm tired of where I am, but I have no idea where I want to go.
Yeah, so I think for someone who wants to make a change, but who feels lost and doesn't know where to start, I think that you need to ask yourself a couple questions. The first question is, what is missing right now? And I
Mhm.
think this is really important because when we're unhappy, jaded, tired, we can kind of put a blanket statement over our careers of like, this sucks, like, or I'm tired. And so what happens though is that especially when we're burnt out, we can just think that we're just over it. And I think you need to first ask yourself what's missing. Is it the company that's not in alignment? Is it the work that's not in alignment? Or is it the culture that's not in alignment? So really asking yourself those questions, like what's missing, what's out of alignment underneath those three things will help you discover what you really need to change. Because sometimes we can be so overcome with frustration about where we're at in our careers that you can make a big leap and in
Yeah.
real I don't like that.
Okay.
And you don't want to do that if you can prevent it. And so instead you should really think about what's missing in your career. Where do you like what do you wish that you could have more of? And I had a perfect example with one of my clients who she had like been in communications for some time. She had worked at a number of firms like in her career. And she was like, I've seen it all. I'm tired. I'm done. I'm not interested. And when she came to me, that was her feeling of like, I'm done with this. And she was lost and she wasn't sure what steps to take and what that looked like. And when I really asked her, like, what do you feel like is missing right now? Is it the company that's not a good fit? Is it the type of work you're doing that's not a good fit? Is it the culture? She
Mhm.
realized that she liked the work, but she hated the places where she was working. She hated the culture. They were not allowing her to grow and thrive. And so from there, she was able to figure out that this was the type of shift she needs to make. She needs to find better cultures, better companies. She needs to move out of like the agency life and go into an in-house company that really aligned with her values and her interests. And that helped her discover exactly what she was looking for. And she was able to get that. But again, even if you are wanting to completely make a shift, that is 100% possible, but really get clear on where and what and why. So that way you can go in the right direction and not change everything if some things are actually still valuable to you.
Yeah. All right. I think we have another question. Um, okay. I was a computer science teacher in a primary school. I want to teach English in Dubai, and my certificate is mainly for adults. This she has a teaching certificate, but I can teach lower levels. I'm not sure if I really want to be in a classroom in a new continent or have another English speaking job in another industry where I can help with my English skills. So, Hannah, do you want to come off mute and just give a little bit more context on like what you're needing, or I don't know, how do you feel like you have enough context for that question?
No, I don't really know the question.
Yeah.
So if she can either type the question in one sentence or if she wants to share, then,
Yes. I'll
Thank you.
let you come off mute. Here we go. All right, Hannah, you should be able to unmute yourself and ask some questions live.
Hi, hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm really glad to be here and to be to benefit from the advices from both of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for
So,
joining.
can you see me?
We
No.
can't see you, but we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So, I worked as a a computer science teacher for 17 years in a primary school here in my country, Tunisia. And I want to travel abroad since I speak English and Spanish and French. So I am a bit a multilingual person. So in that case, I want to know if how to nail that job.
Okay, so it sounds like your question is how to land an English speaking job.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I want to be, as I said in that question, if I want to be in an English in a classroom setting, or it can be in a society where English is spoken there, and
Okay.
to interact with customers maybe.
Okay. So, I mean, I think that clarity comes from within, is what I always say. And so I would recommend really thinking about what do you want? And again, making this transition, it sounds like you're moving to a new country. Sounds like you're starting a new, starting a new job, whatever that's going to look like for you. Those are a lot of changes. And sometimes when we're thinking about change, we feel like we have to make the perfect choice forever. And that can be a lot of pressure. And so I would think about what is the change that you want to make right now? If you could see yourself in a new role in the next year, doing this thing and from now until the very next year, what would that look like? And don't feel like you have to know what that next choice or next role will be for the next 10 years. Because I think when we're thinking about, oh, like I need to make a change, I'm not sure what that change is, we can kind of get stuck because we think it has to be the best perfect thing for us, and it doesn't have to. Your career is full of twists and turns. You can decide to go left and then decide you want to go right. And so the most important thing is, what do you want right now? And what do you feel like best aligns with the skills that you can bring to the table right now? And saying that doesn't mean that you have to go back to the classroom just because that's where your skills are. But it does mean that if you are going to look for other roles outside of that, you want to focus on, number one, where can you leverage the skills you already have to get those opportunities? And so sometimes that may mean that you can make that pivot right now and be somewhere else doing something else, but it should come from a place of, what do I want right now? And what skills do I have right now to be able to get me the opportunity that I desire?
Oh, thank you. Beautiful. I didn't see it that way. So,
Awesome. I'm glad that was helpful.
sorry.
I said, I'm glad that was helpful then.
Thank you very, very much. I'm really grateful too for this opportunity to be able to talk with you too.
Thank you so much. Thank you
Thank you
for
very
joining.
much.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Okay. All right. I think we have another question. When applying and reading a job description, do you have to necessarily match all or most of the qualifications listed, or can or should you still apply if you don't meet all or most of the qualifications?
Yes. So I think that when we don't meet all of the qualifications, there's a difference between unqualified and underqualified. And so unqualified means that you don't meet like it's literally a dream. Like it is seriously a dream job. Like you wish that you could do that job. You don't have any of the experience, right? So that's unqualified. But oftentimes you're not necessarily unqualified. You might just be underqualified. And so that might look like, you meet most of the qualifications, but you don't meet all of them. And so I do recommend that if you are underqualified, and you know that you can do the job, I always recommend thinking about, if you, first of all, feel confident that you can do the job, And then two, do you have examples to show that you can excel in that role? And so when you have examples to show that you can excel in that role, that number one will boost your personal confidence. And then it will also help you be able to better articulate why you're ready and capable of this job, even without the qualifications. I mean, I think we've all heard possibly the statistic that like men apply to like, I don't even know if it's like 50%, like when they only meet 50% of the
50%.
qualifications, and women only apply when they meet 100%. And so
Yeah.
a lot of times women talk themselves out of jobs that they would be chef's kiss at. And so I recommend really thinking about, my stat that I tell my clients is like, focus on if you can meet 80% of the qualifications, you should still apply. Some people say 70%, but again, when we are talking about women and imposter syndrome and confidence, the more you feel confident in yourself that you can do the job, the easier it will be to portray that to others. And so giving yourself a B, even a B minus on the job description is a great way to say, like, I'm still going to go after this opportunity.
Yeah, I love that. And I think we've all been there. We're just like, I meet bullet 1 and 2, but not 3 and 4, not this whole section. But and one thing I learned, especially starting my career, I always tell this story. Because at my first job, I started as a work study student. So I was a person that used to be there, get their coffee and their lunch, and now I was a coworker. And I remember I got into the job and they would be asking me things I learned in like my first week. And so I went to my boss and I said, did you like pay them to ask me these questions? Because there's no way they don't know. I learned it in my first week. And she's like, no, like sometimes you come into a job, especially when you're young or you're a new industry, and you think like everyone knows everything and you're just so underqualified. But then you get in there and you realize it's not as hard as you might think sometimes. You get in there, you have the opportunity to learn on the job. Like I used to be the person I would check myself out if I didn't meet 100%. But then over time, as I got deeper into my career, by the time you get in there, no one can do 100%. Everyone is good at certain things. No one is good across the board. So give yourself the opportunity to learn, to grow in a role, because otherwise no one will apply to anything, I feel like. All right. Okay. Let's see. Are any other questions? And so I know I've heard some people reach out to me on text that they want to work with Adunola one-on-one. So I've dropped some links in the chat. She has a free guide on how to get from zero to interviews to job offers. And then also, as she said, I have learned so much. She is an amazing coach. So if you want to work with her, there's a link. Adunola, can you share a little bit more about your coaching? Is it one-on-one? Is it group coaching, or how does it work?
So I have my program is called Career Redefine. So inside Career Redefine, again, I work with mid to senior level corporate professionals who are ready to take their careers to the next level. And I show you how to land that next job without starting over, settling for less, or applying to jobs 24/7. And this program is a 12-week program where you get my proven step-by-step process. So you'll learn everything from how to get clarity on your next role, how to vet the right company so that you make sure that you're not going to a new job with the same problems, how to make sure that you're packaging your resume, your LinkedIn profile in a way that really aligns with your value and that allows you to stand out. And really understanding your value is something that you're learning in the program too, so that you're not overlooking your skills, downplaying yourself, but you really understand what makes you a top candidate for these roles. And then you also learn how to bypass the ATS system. So that's why I am a little biased when we talk about what's the best job board, because all you really need to know is that the job is available, and we'll show you how to go and get in front of the right decision makers, even if you don't have a big network. And on top of that, when you get the interview, knowing how to interview, knowing how to get from not just the first interview, but to the final round, especially if you're wanting to level up in your career. We talk about the difference between, an interview for an entry-level role and why it's a lot different when you're going for that next level role. And so you'll learn all about that, including how to negotiate. So all of that is inside the program. And then you'll also get 12 weeks of coaching. We have a group coaching call every week where you get to ask your Q&A call. So it's kind of like this environment, but you also get to say, like, ask me directly what your questions are and eavesdrop on other people's questions and answers. And you'll get our feedback and support along the way on everything that you want a second pair of eyes on. So you're fully supported inside the program. I only do private one-on-one coaching a few times a year. So that is at a higher level of the program. But if you are interested in that, then, you can still apply. And when we hop on a call, we can talk a little bit about that. But that would be the best next step to really get all of the beautiful expertise and strategies and everything laid out for you so that you don't have to worry about doing this by yourself.
Yeah, I love it. This was so amazing. And I know even just planning for this call, I was very excited about this one because I know you know people personally. I know people personally with the industry right now that have been laid off. So I'm sure most of you on the call probably are in that situation, looking for your next step, or even if you have a job, you might just be looking to pivot. So I think that's the perfect next step. Reach out to Adunola. She's on Instagram at The New Employee. She's on LinkedIn. Is there anywhere else people can find you?
Yes, you can go to my website as well, but that link is in the chat, employeeredefined.com. But you just gave it all. My Instagram is at The New Employees. They're on live right now. You can also find me on LinkedIn with my first and last name as well.
Yes. Oh, and then someone asked, yes, this conversation, if you want to replay it, just listen to Adunola tips and advice. Before the end of the week, it will be available to watch on YouTube, and also the audio replay will be available on Spotify. So those links will be on the AfroKlash Instagram, and will also be emailed out to you all as well. So if you have someone that couldn't make it, feel free to forward it over to them so that they can get some tips as well. But thank you so much. I have had such a great time. I've loved this conversation. Thank you for your time. I've loved taking up time with you. I really, really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Thank you. Bye, everyone. Have a great afternoon. Bye.